Welcome to the tutorial setting up the character to use IK for Animate. So to begin, we need to import a template from the library. And if you remember, under the Animate library, we have the Karate Rabbit library. So I'm going to import the Karate Rabbit master. However, looking back at video number 55, creating templates, I realized that we never did create the Karate Rabbit master. So you can go back to that scene and create your own template, or seeing as you're going to receive sample material with this video, I wouldn't worry about it too much. So I'm going to click on that and then drag it either into the camera view or the left side of the timeline view. So here we have the full Karate Rabbit, all three views with all the drawing substitutions. And it's up to you if you want to delete this layer or not. I'm going to do that. There we go. So the first thing to consider when rigging for IK is how your character has already been rigged for cutout. So there are three basic types of rigs: basic, mixed rig, and hierarchy rig. What we have here in our timeline is a hierarchy rig, so this works perfectly with the IK. If you have a basic rig, which means you would not see any of the staggered formation in the timeline, so nothing would be controlling anything else, there'd be no hierarchy. That's called a basic rig, and if you have that, you cannot use IK with your character. If you have a mixed rig, which is partial hierarchy, so you'd see a few of these staggered steps, so if, like the arm might control the forearm, which controls the hand, but maybe the body is left loose and open, you should still be able to use IK with the mixed rig, and the computer will just fill in the spaces or create connections between the parts of the character that are already rigged in hierarchy. Okay, so now let's click on the Inverse Kinematics tool from the Tools toolbar, and we actually have to click on some layer from the timeline to bring up the Inverse Kinematics skeleton. So wow, that's pretty scary to look at. There's lots of red lines everywhere and white dots. Just to let you know, the red lines represent bones and the white dots represent pivots between the bones. And the way that the software actually creates a skeleton is between the pivots. So the second thing to consider when rigging for IK is the bones that you don't need. So for every drawing element, or body part, you could say, that's represented in the camera view, there are often multiple bones being produced by the software. And that's because it's producing a bone not only for that drawing element, but also for its peg. So the next step that we have to do is actually ghost out some of the bones, or what we call ghosting out. So let's go to the Tool Properties panel. I'm going to maximize that as well. And the button that you need to use to ghost out is this one here, the Exclude from IK button. So let's start from the bottom up. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. Actually gives you a better view of the pivots and the bones. And let's look for the feet. So you can actually toggle back and forth between the Transform tool and the IK tool to make selections in the camera view. So I just selected the foot, and here I'm going to center on selection the timeline so we can find it. I'm also going to pull this so we can read all the layer names. So here we have the Karate Rabbit foot, which doesn't seem to have its own peg, but is instead hooked with the tibia onto the lower leg peg. So the foot is okay, we don't need to ghost anything out. Then if we go up to the tibia, we have both a bone representing the drawn object as well as the lower leg, so we don't need both of those. So if I select the tibia layer, which is comprised of symbols here, and I click on the Exclude from IK button, I've now ghosted out the tibia. And the way that I'm selecting, I'm trying to decide between either the drawing layer or its peg, is that you usually go for the peg. You go for the highest layer up. So let's go up one more up the hierarchy to the complete lower leg. And once again, we have a drawing object representing the leg here and the entire leg peg. So we don't need the bone representing the drawing object. So I'm going to ghost that out. And now we just have this Karate Rabbit 01 leg peg representing the thigh here. So as well as body parts that have doubles due to the peg drawing object dichotomy, we also have bones that are just completely unnecessary because they're way too detailed. So for example, in the face, you don't need a bone representing the eyebrow, the pupils, the eyes, pretty much any of the facial features. The only bones that you would need in the head is the bone for the head. So that's something else we need to ghost out. So let's use the transform tool to select one of the facial features. So I'll choose the eyebrow here. I'm going to look for it in the timeline. And then I'm going to go back to the inverse kinematics mode. So it seems like all the drawing objects for the facial features are connected to the eye peg here. So I need to ghost all of these out and then the peg itself. So let's do that. So it looks like we still have a few pegs here. I think they might be from the neck. Unless I'm missing something. Oh yeah, there's two mouths because of the mask. So that's one of them. So we also have the head here, and then the head peg, and the head drawing object. So I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. So that's pretty good for the head. So I'm going to continue finishing up the rest of the body, and I might fast forward this part just to get through it quickly. If I run it into anything that I think is of note, I'll be sure to slow down the video again and let you know. So that looks pretty good. So the next stage in rigging the IK skeleton is to actually move the bones in place so that they're overlaid properly over the drawn object. So right now we have a lot of bones that are sticking out towards the right. So in order to move these bones, let's start with the feet again. You actually have to have the bone editing mode selected. So I'll grab that. And you can either search for the layer in the timeline to select it, like we were doing before, where we'd go here, we'd select the foot. We're sure that we have the correct layer selected, and you can go back, and then you can use this to turn the bone, and then have it roughly in the center of the drawing object like that. Or the other thing you can do is you can Command click Mac or Control click Windows to select the bone, and then you're able to drag it into its proper place. So you can do it either way. Oops. It's the same for the hand. If you have some objects in the way like that, it might be easier just to use the transform tool. So yes, we have the hand. And I'm just checking here on the timeline as well, because like I said, sometimes it chooses the drawing object such as the arm when really we want the lower arm peg or the arm peg. So I'm just double checking that the correct layer has been selected as well. So that looks like the tail. So having two bones for the head like this connecting up to the ears is normal, so don't worry about that. Like that. So it looks pretty good. So the one bone you may have noticed that seems sort of out of place is this long bone sort of obscenely hanging down between the Karate Rabbit's legs. Oh, and in fact it looks like we have two. So one must be for the lower body and one must be for the actual master peg. So I believe this one here, centered from the central pivot at the belly button, is that representing the master peg, and this other one here represents, I'm sure, the lower body or the hips. So what I'm going to do is actually select the master peg and then click on this button here, the Enable Translation if Top of Hierarchy button. And as you can see, a little black cross appeared in the pivot point for the master peg bone. And what this does, let me just back out a little bit here, is it'll allow you to grab this while you animate and move the character around. In other words, it'll allow you to translate the character from one position to another using the master peg. So the last thing we have to do is actually create a template from this rigged character. Oh wait, there's one thing I forgot to mention. When you rigged your character, although you created the skeleton for the front view, it translates to the 3/4 view and for the profile view as well. The only difference is that you can't adjust any of these bones that are sticking out because they were set and overlaid over the front view. So when you animate, you'll still be able to animate using the skeleton for the profile view, and this bone will represent foot number 2, but you can't move it, so it's going to be a little bit awkward when you're animating in this view. So if you know there's one view that you're going to animate in particularly over any other view, then it's probably best to set up your skeleton using that view. So in this case, if it was for the 3/4 profile, I would have actually positioned my elements on this view, and then if it's a little bit off for the front or the profile, no matter, you just deal with it. That being said, we now need to rename the layer name. So I'm going to call it Karate Master. Actually, I'll keep it as master and then just put underscore IK. And then I'm going to go back to my library, and in the same template library, the Karate Rabbit, I'm going to right click on it and say write to modify so that I can add a template. And then I'm going to select the entire collapsed Karate Rabbit master IK and then drag it into the right side of the library. Then a dialog box appears allowing me to rename the template. So I'm going to name it just IK like that and say OK. And so there it is, our Karate Master IK, ready for use. So that's it for the tutorial, setting up the character to use IK for Animate. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, animating with the IK.